Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Katie Rinaudo from OrphanWise. And she is the executive director of OrphanWise. And the name is based on something that you used to do, and it's not quite what you're about. So could you explain maybe a little bit about your story and how you came up with that name and what you're doing now? Because this is all about, as I understand it, you're an advocate for TBRI, which is one of the best ways that caregivers can connect and help their kids heal, right? So how did that come about, Katie?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I actually grew up in Central Florida and worked with kids my whole life. So even in 7th grade, I was doing like church nurseries and like the children's programs and things like that. I always loved working with kids and worked at a daycare in high school. And I just knew that I wanted to go to school to study orphan care was what I wanted to do. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And so I went to college for human development, and I did my master's in counseling in holistic child development and did my thesis on best practices for orphan care. And so that was always my passion and my interest. That's where, the term orphan in the name of my nonprofit comes from. And so I spent a few years after I graduated living in South America in the country of Paraguay, and worked at a children's home and lived on campus and worked at school, and I taught English and learned a lot in that amount of time. I learned a lot about practically how children deal with situations in their lives that are not ideal, right? How they deal with trauma and stress, and that they didn't have to be orphans to have experienced that kind of trauma and stress, and to be having what we would call negative behaviors, in quotes, in my classroom or in the home. And so we were looking for what can we do to help these children heal, because we weren't seeing a lot of changes in the children's mental health and their behaviors. And this is children from ages 2 up to 22 that were there. And so that's when we discovered TBRI, which is, I'll talk more about that, I think, but it stands for Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And it was a model that was developed about 15 to 20 years ago. They started working on it at Texas Christian University. And it's a model, a very holistic model, really, for understanding, first of all, the brain and understanding what stress and trauma do to the brain, and then how to practically, like what you can do practically, not just as a therapist, but as a caregiver, daily caregiver, whether that's the staff in a home, an orphanage, or adoptive parents in this case, or foster parent, or a teacher, anyone in that child's life that is with them on a daily basis, how to help them on a healing journey. And so when I started my nonprofit, in answer to your question, I knew that the majority of the population would not really understand the nuances of what I just told you, right? And I needed a quick kind of title or word that would represent what we were doing. And so I picked OrphanWise because I wanted us to be wiser about, what we do when we care for orphans and children from hard places. And in addition, of course, I love that it's a play on words, right? OrphanWise, it's in the direction or in the interest of the orphan or the traumatized or hurting child.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, and a great journey. There's some similarities when we spoke last week. I thought similarities from yourself in terms of a passion for working for kids. Yours started a lot earlier than mine did, right? But then a desire from learning stuff with kids and then sharing what we've learned with parents and with caregivers, because we can't, for logistical, for safeguarding issues, we need to be addressing, we need to be communicating, we need to be sharing what we've learned with the primary caregivers, because they're the ones best placed to make the transformation within their kids' lives. So one of the things that really stuck with me last week when we spoke is the fact that you said something along the lines that you summed up what parents say to you when they get in touch with you in a very simple way. And you said that parents want to know how to fix their kids. Is that what you said?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. What can you do to fix my child?
Yeah. What can you do? What can you do to fix my child? And as it became clear, as our conversation continued, it became clear that essentially asking that question is barking up the completely wrong tree. So do you have that idiom in the US? Is that
yes? Yeah, we do.
We bark, because Katie's also as I don't know how she's got this she's got this ability to multitask, right? And as men, we know that we can't do this. As we're doing this podcast, Katie's actually playing with a dog, and she's managing to hold it all together and answer my questions beautifully, right? But so the fact that you're playing with your dog as we speak, it was why the kind of barking up the wrong tree
metaphor
came to my life. So it came to my life, came to my mind. So why is it you think that people that parents are barking up the wrong tree? Why did you say that?
Well, I think that part of the problem is that by the time we realize that what we're doing or the ways that we have always done things with children that have histories of toxic stress and trauma, by the time we realize that it's not working, we're exhausted and we're completely worn out, and we're at the end of our rope, another metaphor for you. And I think by the time a lot of times a parent is ready to try something new and they come to one of my courses or to my coaching sessions, they're like, please just take them and fix them, right? Talking about my puppy, sometimes I feel like that about her, right? When she's getting, I don't want to go like learn how to train her myself. Someone else take her and fix her and bring her back to me, like I'm just so tired. And so I think a lot of times parents start with that, like there's the problem is with my child. And so they're the ones that need to be fixed. And so, that's not really how it works, because it's Karyn Purvis. She's the woman, the doctor who developed TBRI. She's the one that started it. And she used to say, this work is a dance. Raising a child is a dance. It's two people. It's parent and child. It's not just the child that we are working with. And so the parent is at least 50% of the interaction. And so what we have to think about is, how is what I'm doing as the caregiver, how is what I'm doing currently, how is my current state, whether that's, my hunger, my tiredness, my mental health, how is that affecting this interaction? How are the strategies that I have at my disposal, whether they're the strategies my parents taught me or otherwise, how are they feeding into this interaction? How is my own childhood and my own experiences and my own history of whatever it is, trauma and stress, being triggered by what's happening with my child? So how am I a part of this dance? And so that's really the place that we have to start. And that's why I do what I do with OrphanWise.
Yeah. So if I can just go back to this to try and sum it up though, maybe the reasons, what I guess it seems kind of obvious and intuitive, and we kind of fall for it. So the child's come from hard places. The child's been through some trauma. And so it's kind of, because they've had that history, we're all assuming that they're the one that's got the problem.
Right.
I mean, it's like, so we maybe our life has been, our early life was easier than theirs, and therefore it's them that's got the problem. I'm not really expressing this very well, but I'm trying to get to the point of trying to prompt an insight, right? And I'm trying to understand this myself. So why do we think it's always about somebody else rather than us? Is it our ego? Is it the logic? I mean, what is it? Why do parents think this? Why do the parents think this way?
Well, I think that it's a lot of times it's this, what I would call being in survival mode. We are in the mode of self-protection and self-defense, and looking on the outside, right, for the solutions to what is going on. And what we know is that we can also experience secondary trauma from working with and having a child that has come from a background of trauma. And so, trauma and toxic stress fundamentally change the way our brains develop. They change the way our brain responds to the world around us. And so what we have on the outside to look at is simply behaviors. And we often don't realize, I think it's because we fail to realize that there's things going on underneath the surface that we can't see. We can't see what's going on in the brain or the body of the child, those struggles that are changes that have happened, or in their biology, the things that have changed in their biology, the things they believe about themselves. It's more than just those behaviors. And I think the same is true for us.
Yeah. So I actually recorded a podcast on a similar sort of theme with another Katie, actually, a couple of days ago. And the story that I shared with her was something that occurred to me about me and my mum, right? So I realized, so my mum's downsizing and I'm not being very patient about it. But instead of seeing my own impatience as the problem, I'm looking at my mum and thinking, well, look, you said you were going to do this about, getting rid of some furniture. That's the plan. Why are you going back on the plan? Why is everything up in the air? And naturally, I would be saying, oh, my mum's struggling to cope. But actually, the problem is with me and my impatience. So I can see my own impatience more of the time than I used to, not all the time. So I'm impatient in the swimming pool, for example, right? I'm impatient in the swimming pool, and I'm impatient with my mum. So that's kind of like a personal, perhaps a more trivial example. Hopefully, sometimes it's easier to see this stuff with more trivial things and things outside us. So I thought the problem with mum, I thought the problem was with my mum and her, let's say, dithering, like indecision about downsizing. And then I realized, no, it's not. It's about me being impatient with her. And I got to the point and I thought, well, I shared this with her and I said, I'd like to be as patient with you, Mum, as you were with me, right? And we can't see our own stuff, can we?
It's so hard, right?
It's the self.
And it's hard to see past those expectations, right? Like you have an expectation of this is the way it's going to go. Parents have an expectation of this is the way my child should act. And so I think that is exactly right. The first step is to be self-aware about what is my expectation here, and is it a realistic expectation? Is it the right expectation? And that maybe my expectation is the problem, not the person that is not fulfilling my expectation.
Yeah.
so, like, for instance, with these children, we have, and this comes up a lot in every consultation and training that I do. Why won't my child, but they're 13 years old, why don't they act like a 13-year-old, right? Or they're 8 years old, why don't they act like they're 8 years old? And there's this very, I mean, I'm sure your parents may have said it to you, mine would have said it to me, you know, like, you're 18, act like it. You know, the kind of this like expectation of where the line is and where the bar is set for you. And the thing is that there's a lot of research out there now that shows us that children and adults who've experienced these trauma, we have to change our expectation. We have to change where the bar is, because they're developmentally, socially, and emotionally about half their age. And so, like you're saying, your expectation is one thing, but the reality is another. The same is true for what these children can do, right? They're 13 in chronological years, but they're 7, you know, 7.5 in emotional and social development if they have not resolved their trauma. And so we can't have 13-year-old expectations. We have to have 7-year-old expectations. So yeah, I think being self-aware about why do I have the expectations I have, and having compassion, like you're talking about with your mom, having compassion for and patience is the first step.
So for me, I'm always trying to prompt an insight into these in these podcasts that we do. I'm trying to stay curious myself, and I'm always trying to come back up to the top and look down on it with a bigger perspective. And the thing that struck me is that as the parent knows to an extent, they know the history, right? They know the history, and they can see the behavior. Like, it's obvious. People, I've done a lot of webinars with adopted parents recently, and one of the first things that they always mention is the behavior, and the kind of like the anger fueled behavior, trauma fueled behavior, and that behavior is clear for the parent to see. Okay, they can see that really, really clearly. So that's what looks like is the problem. What they can't see is their expectations. Like, it's hard to see it's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame. It's hard to see our own expectations. They're in our heads. They're
very invisible.
Yeah, they're invisible. They're invisible. They're as invisible as the stuff that's going on inside the child. That stuff manifests itself in this anger and this behavior and this trauma. That is clear. We can see that with our own eyes. We can't see our expectations, and because we can't see our expectations, we don't see how our expectations are creating the problem, feeding the problem,
right? Continuing the cycle.
Continuing the cycle. Yeah, that's a bit. So yeah, it's like it's going into like a vicious circle, isn't it?
Vicious cycle.
Vicious cycle, rather than a virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
So the key would seem to me, just on purely logic, would be to say, well, how do we create a virtuous cycle? So how do we see more? How do we become more self-aware, become more aware of our own expectations, become more aware of this stuff, so that we create a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious one?
Right. So we can look in the mirror. I think it's sometimes really hard to look in the mirror, right? and see what it is that we're actually doing. Yeah, that clarity of being able to self-reflect is a hard step to take, right? Because it can be very vulnerable and can feel very threatening, to be like, I have to change something. I have to dig into my own feelings and thoughts and beliefs and my own history. And I think there's a bunch of different places to start. Like you're just talking about, what do we do so we can have this self-awareness? I think therapy is one way. A lot of times we think about, oh, the child needs therapy, and they do. Don't get me wrong. The child still needs therapy and help. But what we often see is that child gets an hour of therapy a week, and then the caregiver's undoing it the other 100 and whatever hours a week. They're undoing all that work. And so the parent themselves needs therapy. They need a help, a guide basically from someone else that can look at and ask them questions like that curiosity you were just talking about. They can ask them, why, what's going on, what's underneath that, and can ask those good questions. So there's therapy, there's books that can help you to self-reflect that are very good. Understanding your attachment style is a really great place to start. We do that with TBRI, where we talk a lot about talking about cycles. We talk about the attachment cycle, and we talk about what that looks like in kids versus adults. And so maybe it kind of is almost like a diagnosis in a sense of taking your current behaviors and history and looking at, okay, what does this mean? What is this, what are my patterns, and how do I recognize those patterns? And so there's some really good attachment quizzes online that you can do. There's also the attachment interview that's researched and well studied, and it has a lot of years and years behind it that someone who is licensed in the attachment interview can do with you over the phone. So there's ways to start. I think I would say my journey to understanding myself, if we're talking being personal, my journey started with doing my attachment interview and really understanding, okay, I don't have secure attachment, and this is the behaviors and the things that I'm doing, the patterns that I have, and this might be why. And so I could start, when I would do those things, I would be able to say, oh, I'm recognizing this, and now I can think about how I can change those things.
Yeah.
And having conversations just like we're doing here with people that are trusted and people that know you can also be, an informal way of doing that self-reflection too.
Yeah.
So
one of the when I was thinking about this earlier in the week, I was thinking, well, what is self-awareness? And so I Googled it, right? And I Googled it again while we were just speaking now, while you were speaking. And it says, the top result on Google comes from verywellmind.com. Verywellmind.com. That's keyword stuffing. That really, very well mind, right? Sorry, keyword stuffing is trying to get to is trying to name your domain by as many different keywords as you can,
right,
to get to the top of the SEO, right? So it says self-awareness involves being aware. Don't you think that that's really bad when people use the word from the
word in the definition?
Yeah. Okay. So, but this is me being lazy, right? So I just Googled it. Self-awareness involves being aware of different aspects of the self, including traits, behaviors, and feelings, right? So now, so and then it says, essentially, it is a psychological state in which oneself becomes the focus of attention. Self-awareness is one of the first components of the self concept to emerge. And what came to my mind when I saw that, it says traits, behaviors, and feelings. Well, when we talk about kids, we talk about separating the behavior from the child, don't we? We do, yeah. We do. We don't
seeing the real child versus the behavior that's blocking us from seeing the child. Yeah, for sure.
So bearing that in mind, I obviously picked a bit of a duff definition, or Google picked a duff definition for me. What for you is would be a a better definition of self-awareness, as in regard to being an adoptive parent? Because there's the self is, well, like it's my fascination, right? So I could talk about this forever. What self? I would say that our feelings are not part of ourselves. I would say our thoughts aren't part of ourselves. That's my pet stuff. But what would be your view on a better definition of self-awareness for adoptive parents?
Yes, I think my definition is a little broader than yours, so I might use a different term just to separate it out.
Okay.
I would use the term mindfulness.
Okay.
And mindfulness, the definition of mindfulness, I think, boils down to being present, being fully present, and having the ability to acknowledge reality, past reality, present reality, as well as the ability to let it go with compassion for yourself and for others. And so that's kind of, that's more than a definition. I think that's even talking more about the process as well. But when we talk about mindfulness, we're talking about being able to look at where we are, what's happening inside us and outside us, right? I think that's being emotionally present, being physically present, being all in the same place. Like the quote, and I'm forgetting who said this, and unfortunately I have to look it up, but wherever you are, be all there. That quote about being able to not allow the past to dictate. It's going to influence, right? But not to dictate and not to have control, and not allow my circumstances to have control, but in order to make a less impulsive, less reactive, more responsive choice as to how I'm going to show up in the world. That's the essence of mindfulness. The essence of mindfulness is that, my past, my present, and my future, I'm able to integrate them. And being integrated, being whole, that's the whole goal of mindfulness, to not be separated into pieces. But I would actually even say to accept that all of those things are part of myself, my feelings, my thoughts, my emotions, my past, my present, all of that is part of, it makes up who I am, but none of it defines who I am. None of it is all of who I am. So I think maybe we have, I don't know if it's different terminology or different ways of just thinking about it. And I really do enjoy talking through it, but I think that's more of what I would say for parents is so important.
Yeah, I think we do have different. It all comes down to the terms, and what we define by the word self, right? So
sure, yeah.
I think that that specific thing that you shared about doing the attachment interview, mm-hmm. I think that's the bit that really stood out for me as a practical step. So I'm quite a deep thinking guy, and I could quite happily dive into a conversation with you about.
Yeah, I love talking about attachment. It's one of my favorite topics.
So
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about attachment. I don't think I do. I know a lot about the self stuff, but I know a lot less about attachment. So, talk to me about, well, what is it? What is attachment, and why does understanding it, or how does understanding it help an adoptive parent raise a child to thrive?
Yeah, I think it's critical. It's a critical first piece. So attachment is based on a theory that Mary Ainsworth and Bowlby developed and I can't remember what year it was, so forgive me. I'll have to send that to you. But these researchers developed this idea based on some studies they did with baby monkeys and their mothers and in a lab. But at the end of the day, the idea of the attachment theory is that attachment is a cycle that happens over the years of a child's life, and specifically in the first year of a baby's life. There's a lot of attachment going on. So the idea of attachment is that you start with this cycle with the baby cries, or the baby expresses a need. There's a need that this child has, and their body becomes very and they get upset, and their body becomes agitated, and they start to their sympathetic nervous system activates, and so you see their face turning red, and they get upset, and they go into what we call stress or distress. And so maybe they're hungry, they're crying, and then what would happen in a healthy attachment cycle is that the caregiver comes and meets the need, right? So they give them a bottle, or they nurse the baby, and right after that happens, right after the caregiver comes and says yes, then the baby's body calms down. Their parasympathetic nervous system activates, they relax, and they can, stop crying, and they are happy again, and their body is learning how to calm itself. And then, what happens 5 minutes later? The baby now needs their diaper changed, right? So the baby cries again. I'm so sorry about that noise. The baby cries again, and then they get upset, and their sympathetic nervous system gets activated, and then parent comes and changes their diaper and meets the need, and then their body calms down. And so the important part of that is the saying yes, right? The caregiver coming and helping their body to learn this new pattern of getting upset, calming down, distress, calm, and so their fight, flight, or freeze mode, which is what happens when they're in what we would call like their survival mode. They're hungry, or they're tired, or they need a diaper change, they're uncomfortable. That whole system is a foundation for a child for self-worth. I'm worth somebody coming and taking care of me. It's a foundation for self-regulation. My body knows how to get upset and to calm. It's a foundation for trust. The world is a good place. I'm going to be taken care of. And so mental health develops from all of those things, right? Mental health is founded on those, the ability to self-regulate and to calm down, and the sense of self-worth and belief that I matter and my voice matters. And so that's a healthy attachment cycle. And that happens, thousands and thousands and thousands of times in the first year of life, and even throughout the child's life. Child has a need, gets upset, caregiver meets the need, they calm. And so it's a healthy pattern that the body and the brain learn, and that sets that foundation for mental health. But when you lose that caregiver meeting the need, when the caregiver does not come or can't come, is not present mentally and emotionally, or to meet the need, or the caregiver is in fact abusive, or meeting that need with instead of meeting the need, they're hurting, they're harming, they're neglecting, right? When you lose the caregiver piece of that cycle, you lose the whole second half of the cycle. You lose the body's ability to calm. You lose the body's ability to enact that parasympathetic nervous system, and those calming neurotransmitters like the serotonin in the brain. They don't get used very much, and so the brain stays in fight, flight, or freeze. The body stays in fight, flight, and freeze. They're constantly in distress, and so they do not have the mental health foundation. They do not have the foundation of self-worth. They do not have a trusting foundation that the world is a good place, that I'm going to be taken care of. And so you lose, that self-regulation piece of being able to control their impulses and to calm themselves down. And so over time, that attachment cycle either builds or it breaks down. And you have children that go, on one of those two pathways towards mental health or towards mental illness. And we see the consequences of that as the child gets older, and it develops into 4 different attachment styles. That's the theory, is based on these 4 different attachment styles in children and 4 different attachment styles in adults. And they're very similar. They have different names, but the kind of the idea is that they are very similar, and they develop into similar traits as they become adults. And so briefly, I'll just talk about the adults rather than the children, since we're talking to caregivers right now, if that's okay with you.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so for the adults, there's the secure attachment, which is when you've had that caregiver, you know the world is a good place and you have self-worth. 50% of the population actually, according to research, has secure attachment. And then the other types of attachment are insecure styles. So briefly, one of them is called dismissive, and that is the type of, or avoidance, depending on the terminology, the study that you're looking at. But the idea is that this is a parent or a person, an adult who can't trust people. Maybe their needs were met physically, but maybe their emotional needs were not met. They didn't have the emotional side of the connection. And so they trust in things more than people. They might prefer to be on their computer, on their phone, might be, going out on the boat on the weekend instead of spending time with their family. And so that's a dismissive attachment style. This is the parent that's like, walk it off, you'll be fine, like not acknowledging the pain that's in the moment because they want it to go away as fast as possible. And this parent might have trouble, like you're talking about, seeing their themselves, seeing how what they're doing is relevant, how it affects the interactions that they're having, because they don't want to sit with emotions, and they might not remember very much of their childhood. Everything was great with their childhood. They don't have a lot of memories. And then on the other flip side is the anxious or entangled attachment style. And this is the adult that is very almost over self-aware, right? They know, or they think they are. They remember every detail from their childhood. They have maybe a lot of resentment or a lot of anger towards the way they were raised or what they went through. They have a very strong codependency or over connection with people to the point where they have trouble making their own decisions or doing anything alone. They really have a lot of trouble with autonomy, with kind of being their own person. And so they're entangled, that's the word that's used, because they have trouble separating themselves from other people, like maybe a people pleaser. This might be the adult who sees their child's success as their success. They over-identify with their child. They're living vicariously through their child, right? And so that's another attachment style. And then the final one is called disorganized. And this is an attachment style that's unresolved. They don't have a consistent pattern for dealing with relationships in the world. Attachment, that pattern, that cycle of attachment sets us up for relationships in life, whether those are relationships with friends or coworkers or future partners. And so when it is not a secure attachment, then we don't learn a pattern sometimes to interact with the world at all. So when you understand, all that to say, when you understand where you fall along those lines, that's the first step to becoming self-aware, because you start recognizing those patterns.
Yeah.
I tend to do this, I tend to do this, and maybe how they are not as healthy as they could be.
So what we're talking about with self-awareness then really is more like, the traits awareness, like that. When I read that description, I said, traits and behaviors. What with self-aware isn't being aware of who we are or discovering who we are. It's looking at our own behaviors and making what is invisible visible to us. And presumably these are all these are zones rather than categories, right?
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's a continuum. I also would say that it depends. Sometimes I would say I'm more one type with certain person and more like another with another person. And so I think that it's very much like you're saying, it's a continuum rather than a strict category.
Yeah. And it's person specific. So I guess,
definitely.
Interesting. Because I hadn't seen that come in at all. that might be, that's an interesting thing, for perhaps for people to reflect on, is, to what extent are they different with different people?
Yeah, for sure.
So I sometimes think about that in terms of myself and how I am with I am professionally rather than personally, right? So
oh, definitely. Those can be two very different. And dismissive personality, or the dismissive attachment style, excuse me, is an ideal one to have at the professional level, right? To be able to put your emotions aside and be very logical and focus on the task. So some of those skills are very, very useful in different situations, and you might use them in your professional life, and they may not serve you as well in your personal life. Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating, because the thing came to my mind on that is, when you're having problems with the computer, when I'm having problems with the computer, and you get this, and maybe you're trying to get something through, you're ringing a helpline, or you're trying to get some, an answer on. These days it isn't helplines; it's all online chat, isn't it? Because because it's a lot faster, and people can be, and there's records of it. And I often think that those people on those help desks or help chat boxes seem to be totally and utterly, dismissive, to use that word. They have come.
Oh yeah.
But they are so. I can see how that benefits them, but as a frustrated user, when for me, what they're showing is a complete lack of empathy, a complete lack, and so.
That's so frustrating, isn't it? When you can't get any type of emotional response from someone that you're trying
or just an acknowledgement. There's just there's no acknowledgement of it, and that, like, do you not? They obviously everybody's customer care friendly, and customers first and all that, and you just think, nah, you're not. I don't see that in your I don't see that I don't see any evidence of that on the people on your helpline. They don't acknowledge anything. It's just,
that's really interesting. How that plays out in different jobs.
Yeah, and I often think about the techies, the cone heads, who seem to have ice running through the veins. They just expect the computer to go wrong all the time, and they just stay with it. And I'm at somewhere at the other end of the spectrum, absolutely losing it. Anyway, so what else? And sorry. So if we can, what we're talking about here really is relevant, because it's a difference in attachment styles, isn't it? So I'm talking about a difference in style between me and some, techie geek helpline person, and you're talking about the becoming
the parent and the child,
or parent and a child. So our attachment style, there may be some clashes here, and clashes in option clashes in attachment style don't seem to be conducive to trust. You said TBR stands for trust, right? So if there's that mismatch,
exactly. So that's why it's called that, right? That's why it's called trust-based relational intervention, because what it's all about is rebuilding that attachment cycle. It's about going back, that we know now that the brain continues to change and grow and form throughout the lifespan. So you aren't set in your, future relationship. This is how it is forever by the time you're 12. You can continue to make those improvements in yourself, that you can become self-aware. You can change the way that you respond, and you can help a child to build trust again by redoing that attachment cycle. And so basically what TBRI is all about is understanding that the way that I respond to the child in my care, it has the ability to affect their brain and their body and their beliefs and their biology, which will in turn impact their behavior at the end of the day, because the behavior is just a symptom of all of those things. And so what we want to do is get to that point in the attachment cycle where it went wrong, where the child did not receive the yes, they did not receive the nurturing care that they needed. And we want to start to say yes and to rebuild and to let them know that they can trust and their voice matters, and give them back a voice and give them back appropriate amounts of control and the ability to have say in what happens to them. And so that's why this is such an effective tool, because it is holistic and because it does work on rebuilding what has been damaged in a healing way, right? Not to fix the child, but to create a secure attachment figure for that child that they have not had. And so the exciting part about this, and this is why what OrphanWise does is so, I think, unique in some ways, is because, you know, I loved working with the kids myself. And honestly, I prefer to teach kids. I love kids. But I found that if I really wanted to help with the healing process on a larger, more sustainable scale, that I needed to help the attachment figures, because I can't be an attachment figure for 10,000, 20,000 children. You know, it's just impossible for me to be that person. But I can teach these skills. I can bring TBRI understanding and those strategies to 20,000 parents, 20,000 caregivers, and that they can impact, you know, 50,000, 100,000, however many children. And so that's that ability to empower the caregivers to become that secure, safe person for their child that their child needs. That's the whole goal of everything that we do.
Yeah. And I want to take you right back to the start of what you just said then, because I thought there was genius in it. You said behavior is a symptom.
Yeah.
Behavior is a symptom. And I guess people that come to you know it's
they see behavior as the thing to be fixed.
Yeah.
Right.
But so I find it fascinating because they're coming to you because of your TBRI credentials, right? And yet they're still thinking that it's about fixing the kid. I find that fascinating.
I think that, yeah, ultimately the goal is they want healing they want their child to be fixed. They want healing for their child. And you know that we do get to those strategies. How do I give good eye contact? How do I understand sensory processing? How do I support my child's body through nutrition and hydration and things like, we do talk about those strategies. But it's all about starting with the caregiver, because, and maybe this is the key of all of it, is, and Dr. Purvis used to say this, you can't take a child on a journey you haven't made yourself. And so unless we have done that journey of healing for ourselves, we cannot take the children on that journey with us.
Yeah. So do we fail to see our own wounds? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Maybe it's too painful. Maybe we thought they were already taken care of. But yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. That feels like a good place to bring it in. That's been fantastic, Katie. So as always, listeners, I always create some show notes, they're called, at the bottom on the podcast, so that you can find out more about the guests that are on, and you can connect with them on social. You can check out their websites. So I would urge you to take a look at what Katie's doing. If you're still listening now, an hour in, there must have been something that resonated for you, right? So if you're looking to explore this more, then check out OrphanWise. It's orphanwise.org, right?
Yep, that's correct. And on Facebook and Instagram at OrphanWise as well.
Yeah. Okay. So don't worry if you're driving or walking the dog. There's links in the show notes to the socials and the website. And Katie, thanks again. That's been brilliant and fascinating for me to learn. I asked somebody about attachment theory, and they went far too deep, and they just completely lost me. I'm not bright enough. I wasn't bright enough to keep up with them. So the fact that you gave us a great overview of that, that really helped me. So that's great.
I'm so glad. That's great to hear. Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Thanks a lot. All the best. Bye-bye. Bye, listeners.
Thank you.